How long has your family lived in its present home? 10 years? 20 years? 30 years, perhaps? Well, members of the Parker family have lived in their home, Bruhamm Hall in Lancashire, since one of their ancestors built it over 400 years ago. We can see that the outside of the hall hasn't changed very much over the last 150 years or so because of this old painting from that time by a famous artist called Turner. So let's go inside and see what clues to the past we can find there. This is the hall. When Bruhamm was first built over 400 years ago, this was the most important room in the house. It was used for all kinds of things. It was a living room, a dining room, a general meeting room, and for some of the servants it was a bedroom as well. In fact, it was so important that Bruhamm isn't called Bruhamm House, it's called Bruhamm Hall. It might have looked something like this. The master's chair by the fire looks impressive, but with its wooden bars, it wouldn't be very comfortable. Now, it might seem splendid drinking ale from a tankard like this. You can see it's made of wood and bound by 2 iron hoops. But if you look carefully around the hall, you'll see that, well, life might have been splendid, but it certainly wasn't comfortable. Look, for example, at the floor. Stone flags. It's cold even now in summer, and in winter it would be damp as well. And even with rushes, these have been gathered locally, even with rushes spread along the floor, like this, nice and thick, I think the cold would still strike through. Because it was so cold in here, they needed a big fire, and this is why this fireplace is so big. They also need a lot of servants to keep it going, and to rake up all the ashes as well. Of course, it was for show as well. The Parkers were an important family, and you can see that the fireplace is beautifully carved, and there in the centre is the Parkers' coat of arms, 3 stags. When people began to want more comfort and privacy, instead of being a general living room, the hall became just an entrance hall, as you see in this old drawing. Now, this is what I mean by comfort. Well, not really what I mean by comfort, but what this man meant by comfort. That's Thomas Lister Parker, who lived here 200 years ago. Now, no doubt in your house, your mother's got rid of your old furniture and bought the latest furniture, or perhaps your family have added a room onto your house. Well, Thomas Lister Parker there, he did both. He added on this room, a dining room, in 1807. There's a plaque outside that shows us that. And he bought what then, 200 years ago, was the latest furniture. And you can see it's very, very different from the hall, isn't it? There's a carpet on the floor, not rushes, a carpet for warmth. On the walls here, they're not bare plaster walls. This is red baize, very similar to the baize that you get on expensive billiard tables. Look at these chairs. Very different, aren't they, from the chair you saw in the hall. This is red silk, and it's nicely padded. And notice the rail here. That's there so that the chairs don't mark the wall. It's easy, isn't it, to imagine what it would be like when the family was dining here. Look how many servants they had to wait on them. Against the wall here is a piece of furniture I've never seen before. It's obviously a table, but it's built in half a circle. On here is some kind of a holder, and it moves on a track like this. Now, what do you think it is? It's a wine table. When the ladies had withdrawn to the drawing room, servants would carry the wine table across in front of the fire, and then the gentlemen could sit around here in the warmth and tell each other their hunting stories, you know, how many grouse they'd shot, the deer they'd hunted, the type of things the ladies wouldn't have been interested in. And this carriage here really carries the wine from one person to another. And the shield here prevents the warmth of the fire getting the wine hot. And if you're wondering why they would go to all the trouble to make a special carriage to pass the bottle from one gentleman to another, well, look how cluttered the table would be with glasses. It'd be very difficult to pass a bottle along without knocking one of the glasses over. So, while the family relaxed, some of the servants would still be busy in the kitchen on the other side of the hall. Well, this is the kitchen. I say is the kitchen because you can see from the modern cooker that it's still used as a kitchen. Now, it's easy to pick out the old fireplace, and remember this was used for cooking, but I wonder what this is. It's a kind of machine above here. There are cogs, a bit like the cogs that you get on the inside of a clock. They're a clue to the past, to a time when whole carcasses of meat, like a whole pig, were turned on a spit, so that the meat roasted evenly in front of the fire. And look at the joints of meat and bunches of herbs hanging from hooks on the ceiling. The meat would have been smoked or salted so that it wouldn't go bad. Remember, there were no refrigerators in those days. The hooks are still here. Now, I think that what we've just seen was the remains of a turnspit, but I know for certain what was cooked in this kitchen because Mrs. Edward Parker, who lived here about 200 years ago, has left a recipe book. In this book, she's copied out in very beautiful handwriting all her recipes. There's one here for lemon cheesecakes. And I even know from this book how much things cost because odd bills have been kept in them. Here's one for 14 pounds of fine brown sugar, which cost 9 shillings. That's in the old money. And look here, a pound of raisins, which cost 7p. Now, I don't want to give you the impression that ladies 200 years ago spent all their time in the kitchen. After all, they'd plenty of servants to do most of the cooking. In fact, Mrs. Edward Parker's sister-in-law, Elizabeth Parker, certainly had time to keep a diary. Here it is. She records, Sunday, July the 12th, arrived here a box from my son John. She's obviously delighted because this is a parcel with presents from her son. Here it is, a pair of plated candlesticks, 6 white pocket handkerchiefs, 2 pounds of green tea. Now, I don't suppose your mother would be delighted if you bought her as a present 2 pounds of tea, but in 1777, and that's when the diary is written, and up here in the country, tea drinking was a new and very fashionable custom. And here's a tea service from that time. Think about your tea service at home and compare it with this one. The first thing I notice is that the cups don't have handles. They're like little dishes or bowls. And the second thing is that there's no milk jug here. Tea was drunk just as it was. But the main thing I notice about this is how small and delicate everything is. See how small and thin the cup is, and how small and delicate the teapot is. Tea was introduced from China and was very expensive. So it was sipped slowly rather than drunk in large amounts as we do today. The family would take tea in this room. It's called a drawing room. To me, everything in here seems much more delicate and elegant than in the dining room next door. The walls are covered in silk. The furniture seems lighter, not as heavy as the furniture next door, and there's probably a good reason for that, because this was a room which above all the ladies would use. You remember me telling you that after dinner the ladies would withdraw. Well, they would withdraw to this room, and that's why it's called the drawing room. It's an elegant room, but it could still be cold, so the best place would be near the fire. And there are plenty of clues here about what the ladies did. This is a sewing table. It's got some nice little compartments in it to hold thread, or pin cushions or something like that. And the type of sewing or embroidery they would do, you can see here. This is tapestry work. Now, this is a curious thing to be near the fire. What do you think it was used for? Well, nowadays, everyone wants to get brown or sunburned, but in this period, it was very fashionable to have a pale complexion. And as the ladies sat here, near the heat of the fire, their face would redden. So this is a fire screen. It's designed to protect their face from the fire. And it does, in fact, move up and down according to whether the lady was short or tall. But I won't move it because it's rather old and it's in a delicate condition. But when I mentioned the room being cold, well, here's a clue to that. What do you think this is? Well, it's a footstool. The ladies, when they sat in the chair, would put their feet on it, not because it was more comfortable or anything like that, but because it would keep their feet from the floor, because from the floor and along the floor would come cold drafts. At the end of the day, the sewing would be tidied away, a little bit more carefully than I'm doing it, but there is a special compartment here with a lid on that you can see, the sewing table closed, and then one of the ladies would ring the bell for the servants to come with candles to light them to bed. When people look round a country house, they expect to see a four-poster bed, and this is one of the four-poster beds in Bruhamm Hall. It's very big, isn't it? In fact, some of them are so big they needed steps to climb to get into the bed. Have you ever thought, though, why they built beds with four posts and with a roof on? Well, with curtains drawn all the way round, it makes the bed into a kind of little private room, and also, and this is just as important, it keeps out the cold and the drafts. Now, this bed was altered about 100 years ago, so the curtains, as you'll see, don't go all the way round. I'll put it back. But in most four-poster beds, the curtains would go all the way round. And if you think I'm exaggerating about the cold and the drafts, have a look at these that I've had brought out for you. What do you think this is? Look, there's a tassel on the end. Well, this is a nightcap. This is what a gentleman, well, I know who it was. This is Thomas Parker. This is what a gentleman would have worn in bed to keep him warm. And this is the same thing, a nightcap, which would have been worn by a lady. There are the tapes to tie it under her chin. Here you've got a number of clues about what there wasn't at Bruhamm Hall. Until quite recently, bathrooms and toilets at Bruhamm Hall were so few and far between that it was still necessary for the servants to carry water up to the bedrooms for people to wash with. And that's why all these things would have been here at the side of the bed. The bowl and the jug here for cold water, and the servants would bring up hot water in this brass jug. The brass would keep in the heat. And behind here is a container for the toothbrushes. And this one here is for soap. It's got holes in it so that the soap doesn't get soggy. And you can see this is being used for washing because the water's splashed all over the table there. This window's a clue to a special job the Parkers had. For hundreds of years they bore the title of bow bearers of the Forest of Bowland, and that meant that they were responsible for making sure that no deer were poached from the nearby forest. And this is one of the things that the bow bearer used. It was last used 200 years ago, and it's a dog stirrup. Only dogs small enough to go through this stirrup were allowed in the forest. See, the bigger dogs would be a threat to the deer. And if the dogs didn't go through the stirrup, and Starling here, she's a Parker, won't go anywhere near, then I'm sorry to say that they will be destroyed. Now, there's bound to be a country house somewhere near you. Why don't you visit it and see how many clues you can find?